Whatculture.
For some reason, the world loves a good old-fashioned manhunt. Whether it's the thrill of the chase or the sheer idea that someone so dastardly is on the loose, the human race has always been keen in hearing about a renegade on the run. This, in many ways, peaked with O.J. Simpson in the early 90s, which in turn spawned reality TV. But trying to run down individuals who most definitely don't want to be caught has almost become a form of entertainment in itself. Hence why you clicked this video to begin with. You love this stuff. I'm Simon from Whatculture, and this is 10 Legendary Manhunts. Number 10. Geronimo. Geronimo didn't hold back, kicking things off as a guerrilla military leader in 1851 after his wife and children were killed by Mexican soldiers. He and 200 men waged war against Mexican troops and settlers who had annexed Apache land, which all sounds fair when you think about it. After the US had won the Mexican-American War and pushed this point even further, Geronimo led attacks on white settlers between 1857 and 1886, which is quite the dedication to the cause. He was captured once in 1877, but he escaped in 1881 and went right back to doing what he was doing before. He was such a threat, or at least seen that way, that at one point 5,000 troops were trying to find him. Eventually he surrendered in 1886 and spent the rest of his days as a prisoner of war. His very last words were, "I should never have surrendered, I should have fought until I was the last man alive," proving that Geronimo was a fighter to the end. Number 9. Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. El Chapo, translated as Shorty, which makes sense as he's only 5'6", was the crime and drug lord in Mexico in the early to late noughties and is credited for importing more drugs into the US than any other past organizations. He was like the Nike shoes of smashing drugs. Taking advantage of the situation and rising to power when his main rival was arrested in 2003, he became the top dog of Mexican cartels and even escaped capture in 2001 after bribing guards and hiding in the prison's outgoing laundry. This naturally meant he was a fugitive, but in spite of all of that, El Chapo split opinion by doing very altruistic things, such as going into restaurants and paying for everybody's meals. He got snapped up once more in 2014, but then pulled a Shawshank and escaped again using a series of complex tunnels, but in the long run, he wasn't to be. The feds caught up to him in 2016, and he's currently awaiting trial. Number 8. Bonnie and Clyde. Here's some facts about Bonnie and Clyde that you may not know. For one, they didn't work alone. The pair were actually part of a larger group known as the Barrows Gang. Secondly, the whole bunch was being chased. For some reason, everyone just focused on these two. Given their relationship, kinda made sense. Only a month after they first met in 1930, Clyde was arrested for petty offences and then busted out of jail with a gun Bonnie smuggled in for him, and for the next 4 years they carried out a slew of crimes without being caught. Which was annoying for law enforcement, as you would assume, especially as most scenarios ended up with a cop being killed. It wasn't until 1934 an ambush was pulled off successfully, but that required tracking the couple for 3 months and firing 100 rounds into the couple's car, so it took a lot to stop the famous duo. Number 7. Ned Kelly. Ned Kelly was the leader of the Kelly Gang with his brother Dan, Joe Byrne and Steve Hart. While they started off relatively small fry, horse thefts and so on, it all ramped up a notch when a group of policemen were sent to stop them and said policemen were killed. Now shit got serious. Going on the run for 2 years, they also started to rob banks, because why the hell not? On occasion, they'd even steal officers' uniforms, just to really rub salt into that wound. Then June 1880 rolled around. Holed up in an inn with around 60 hostages after a police assault, the entire gang was killed other than Ned, who would have escaped if he hadn't have come back to try and save his brother. He didn't, and was tried and hanged at the age of 25. Number 6. Dan D.B. Cooper. While we should never glamorize criminals, sometimes you do have to be impressed with how one goes about their business. Dan Cooper is such a person. On November 28, 1971, a man calling himself just this bought a one-way ticket to Seattle from the Portland airport. During said flight, he informed the attendants that he had a bomb, as you do, demanding that once the plane was grounded, he was given $200,000 and control of the aircraft so he could parachute out of it at some point to get away. Well, that's exactly what he did. As you'd imagine, after this, the FBI, the army, and local police all got together to start one of the largest manhunts in history. But due to the large search area and large number of potential locations Cooper could have landed, there was no substantial evidence ever uncovered. The investigation was officially suspended in January 2016, with authorities no closer to knowing who the man was or what became of him. His crime remains the only unsolved act of air piracy in history. That's kinda cool. Number 5. John Dillinger. Falling into the traditional Depression-era gangster MO, John Dillinger made a career robbing banks, but things turned up a notch as he would also turn his attention to police stations. That wasn't exactly the thing he just did. Somehow managing to get away with it and escaping prison twice. He even went as far as to have plastic surgery to change his appearance and burn his fingerprints off with acid. The worst part with that one is that it didn't even work, so all that pain and he could still get ID'd anyway. Dillinger was constantly on the run throughout the 30s until the FBI found him after a tip-off from a lady known as Anna Sage, someone who only did this because she didn't want to be deported. Sage was deported anyway, John D was caught, and the government actually spent more money to catch him than he actually stole. Good work, team. Good work. Number 4. John Wilkes Booth. It may have only lasted 12 days, but the hunt for John Wilkes Booth was one of the largest in history. And this makes sense too, given he murdered President Lincoln. If you're trying to ensure a lot of people want to find you, that's what you do. Fleeing with his accomplice, David Herold, the pair were doomed from the start because Booth was a well-known actor, so everyone knew who they were looking for. Rewards of up to $100,000 were offered, and throughout all this, John was even surprised he wasn't seen as a hero. Well, no, jackass. Killing people isn't cool. The cavalry eventually caught up to him as he slept in a barn, which was actually set on fire to lure him out, and when he did, Wilkes was shot in the neck. He died soon after. Number 3. Jesse James. The James Younger gang, led by Jesse James, was formed by a group of former Confederate guerrillas at the end of the Civil War in 1865. They robbed banks, stagecoaches, and trains, and while you may have heard otherwise, this was not a Robin Hood type situation. James and his team took from the poor and stuffed money into their own pockets without thinking about anybody else. They evaded both police and the Pinkerton Detective Agency, who were brought in 1874 by the train companies, and then in 1882, Robert Ford, who was part of the Klan, was arrested for the murder of a man named Wood Hite, which cannot be a real name. Rather than be hanged for his crimes, Ford posed a deal with the governor of Missouri wherein he agreed to kill Jesse James in exchange for a pardon and a reward. And that happened too! In March 1882, Ford shot James in the back of the head as James was dusting a picture. And there's a lesson right there. Never trust your friends. Number 2. Jan Balsrud. Norwegian Jan Balsrud found himself in Britain in 1941 due to the Nazi occupation of his homeland. Feeling like he needed some payback, in 1943 Jan and some chums did go back to Norway with the intent of punching some Germans and establishing a Norwegian resistance. Unfortunately, this failed instantly. They all mistook a civilian for their contact, and then said civilian turned them in and the Nazis went on the hunt. Trying to make their escape in a tiny boat, that was promptly sunk and everyone captured except Jan. This kickstarted yet another chase that got so bad, our runaway had to kill a Gestapo officer, operate on his own leg with a pocket knife, and cut off several of his own toes. He didn't do that for fun, he had frostbite. He somehow did this for over 2 months and was able to get to Sweden and eventually back to Britain, where he would help train commandos preparing to take back Norway. He didn't even give up. Number 1. Pancho Villa. Pancho Villa was a Mexican revolutionary and bandit, so he was living all the dreams. In 1916, he and 500 men crossed the border into New Mexico in a raid on the small town of Columbus, and that's when everything went bad. In response, President Woodrow Wilson ordered the army to capture Villa, and he really went to town on the idea, sending out 4,800 men and 8 airplanes. It's a tad excessive. The real joy here, though, isn't Pancho himself, but the fact this massive army was genuinely rubbish. Firstly, they raided a village that Villa hadn't even visited, and then they headed for Guerrero. While they were doing that, they ended up marching twice the distance they needed to, and when they got there, they still couldn't find their man, who had been transported out of there hours beforehand. In short then, they sucked, and Villa was able to continue on his merry ways, all because of incompetence. Know of any other amazing manhunts? Let us know in the comments below, and then don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Then follow Whatculture on Twitter at Whatculture, and go on over to whatculture.com to read even more articles. I am Simon from Whatculture, and I will chat to you again soon.